So we'll pull the back off and see what kind of condition we've got here.
You got it.
So there's usually two little hex bolts holding the drum on. It looks like there's only one on here, so somewhere along the way, looks like one of them disappeared, never got put back on. These aren't usually too bad to get off. This one's pretty loose. We made sure the parking brake is off. Sometimes you got to loosen up the shoes on the inside from a little access hole in the back. Sometimes you can pull them off, and they're, in this case, we got lucky they're not really stuck on there. So it's kind of hard to tell if these were working. Since the car's been sitting for 10 years, there's a little bit of rust in here, but they don't look too bad. What I don't like seeing, and what I see here, is some really greasy shoes. These shoes got a lot of grease on them, which is more than likely brake fluid, which tells us more than likely the wheel cylinder was losing some fluid, losing brake fluid. That brake fluid came out and got onto the shoes, so that's not gonna work. Once these shoes get a lot of brake fluid in them, they're pretty well shot. We'll need new brake shoes, and we'll go ahead and replace the wheel cylinder. That's not going to be too bad. That should be pretty easy. The hard part, I think, is going to be getting the connections loose on some of these brake lines. There's a bit of corrosion in there. We had a little bit of trouble with the ones on the front, so that's just going to be kind of a hit or miss. We'll see how lucky we get taking the brake lines apart. So we decided we really needed to replace all of the brake lines. Yep. We started taking some of the connections apart at the wheel cylinders, and some of the brake lines are just so corroded we couldn't even get them apart. Yep. There's 7 hard brake lines and 4 soft brake lines that make up the system. So there's, I think I counted 15 connections or something like that. So after 49 years, the whole brake system really needed to be redone, all new brake lines. So we end up changing all of the brake lines on this car. Most of them were in such bad shape that we just replaced them all. And you can buy straight sections of brake line at your auto parts store. What you want to do is measure the brake lines you took off and buy a new section that's pretty close to the dimension that you need. You're always going to want to keep the brake lines you take off. They're really handy to use as a template for bending the new line. So you can use all these old lines. We put blue tape on them and marked them where each hose went so that we could rebend them. In some cases, we had to buy a line that was longer than we needed, so we bought some that were extra long. They do have factory flares on the end, but we had to buy extra long ones and make some of our own length. So we had to cut the lines and reflare them. And we bought a flaring tool, which you can get at the auto parts store. You cut the line, put the fitting on, and you can reflare them. So we had to do that on a number of the lines. So all of the lines have been replaced. The line going from the front of the car to the back of the car for the rear brakes actually goes through the inside of the car. It goes in where the foot pedals are, it travels down the inside of the car, goes through a couple of rear bulkheads and out the back. Between the hard lines and the soft lines, there are, I don't know, we counted 14 or 15 connections on these brake lines. We tightened them pretty snug, but when we go to bleed the system, we're going to have to check each and every one of those connections for leaks and maybe have to retighten those a little bit. So we'll have to check those really carefully when we bleed the system. So to get the shoes off, the shoes are really held on just by these 2 pins here. There's a little spring, and they do make a tool, but you could do this with pliers or vice grips. But we're trying to spin this spring without spinning the pin that's holding it in. So if we can spin that 90 degrees or so, there, it unhooks it. There's a little keyway there, it unhooks. The pin comes out the back, and that frees up the brake shoe. So you can do that on each side. And from there, it's really just kind of pulling things apart. We'll have to also pull these springs off down here, and there's another spring up here. So that might take a little bit of doing. And then this is the emergency brake portion. And that's got a little clip. So we'll have to pry the little C-clip loose. Comes out. So the rear brakes are reassembled. We've got new brake shoes. We've got a new wheel cylinder. We've freed up the adjusters here on the bottom. We've put in new brake line on the rear, so this is ready to be bled. And the rear drum we had resurfaced. It's in still pretty good shape, and we cleaned it up a little bit with a sandblaster, so that's ready to go on.